Hello, everyone. I'm Fernanda Silva from Acronis, and I'm very excited to host our virtual event, Defeat Downtime and Quickly Recover Any System, Anywhere, by Anyone. We are live, and I can see there are a lot of people joining, so thanks to each and every one of you for being with us. Just a side note, this event is being recorded, so don't you worry. In case you feel like you've missed anything, we will share a link for this recording later. Today, we're going to dive into the biggest technology challenge that businesses are facing right now, building cyber resilience. You will hear about taking a life cycle approach to defending against cyber threats and recovering effectively from those that actually do recover. We have an all-star lineup of experts who will discuss what can be done to conquer this challenge. From various perspectives, we will have compliance regulators, cyber insurers, our partners and customers, industry professionals, and researcher analysts. We'll also share with you how Acronis is helping businesses in both the commercial and industrial sectors to succeed in building cyber resilience with some exciting new capabilities that we have recently introduced. Okay, so to ask your questions during the event, so please use the Zoom Q&A feature. We'll have a live session towards the end where our experts will answer all of your questions. Okay, so let's get started with the first introducing the lineup of cybersecurity experts and practitioners joining us today. We'll have Pat Hurley, our Regional Vice President of Acronis here. And we'll have from IDC, the Research Vice President of Infrastructure Software Platform, Phil Goodwin. The founder of Brunsman Advisory Group, Joe Brunsman. Our own Director of Business Solutions, James Slaby. Stephen Nichols, the Director of Solutions Engineer here at Acronis. The CTO at Scale Computing, Alan Conboy. And Ryan Davis, our Senior Director for Large Enterprise Customers. Okay, now we can go to the poll. So before we get to today's agenda, we would like to know from you, what is your usage of cybersecurity framework? So let's get the poll here for you with the options. Okay, so what are your cybersecurity framework? We know about cybersecurity frameworks, but do not use much. We use the NIST cybersecurity framework. We follow the ISO IEC 27 series information security management systems standard. We use the CIS critical security controls best practice guidelines. We use cybersecurity standards and frameworks not listed there. So take a quick look, and while you answer this question, we're gonna move on to our lineup session. So first we'll have James of Acronis, cybersecurity expert Joe Brunsman will discuss the importance of building cyber resilience to meet compliance regulations and how to qualify for cyber insurance. Then Phil Goodwin, a veteran research leader at IDC, will review his recent report on cyber recovery sector. Then Pat Hurley from Acronis will look at some critical case studies in building cyber resilience, including large distributed enterprises, highly automated manufacturers, other industrial concerns, and the smaller businesses that have been struggling to adopt the latest endpoint security measures. Then Stephen Nichols, our super system engineer, will give us a quick tour of Acronis Cyber Protect. That's our solution that cyber resilience, will cover that challenge for you. So lastly, Acronis enterprise expert Ryan Davis will address real-world challenge with tech infrastructure builder Alan Conboy of Scale Computing. So our speakers will then join us on stage to answer your live questions. Okay, well, let's take a look at the results of the poll question on how each of you is currently working with security frameworks. Okay, so we got here majority with 33%. So we got 16 responses that we know about the security framework, but do not use them much. And we also got a few that, 18% on 2 answers here, what is cybersecurity framework? And we use cybersecurity standards and frameworks that are not listed here. So thank you everybody for your answers, and let's move on. Okay, so it's time to start with our first session. James Levy has worked as a cybersecurity solution professional and industry analyst covering security and networking for over 30 years. James will be interviewing Joe Brunsman, a former U.S. naval officer who is specialized in network security and database management before earning his master's degree in cybersecurity law. And if you do not know this, he is also the author of 4 best-selling books in insurance, and the last 3 focus directly in cybersecurity. So in addition to all of this, Joe is also practicing insurance broker. So welcome, Joe and James.
Thank you, Fernanda, for that introduction. Welcome, Joe. It's great to have you back with Acronis again. We've relied on your expertise in cyber insurance for several events like this, and it's always great to have someone who not only has been on the practitioner side back in your Navy days, but really understands the service delivery business and issues around cyber insurance.
Happy to be here. Oh, if I could add real quick, that whole cybersecurity framework thing, I just had to add. I'm a big fan of people at least mapping to a framework. Obviously, easier said than done. I'm a proponent of NIST, which is probably one of the more difficult ones. However, that is what regulators are going to judge you against, right? That's kind of the gold standard. So I think if you're in a highly regulated environment, if you have cybersecurity laws that pertain to you, then having NIST is probably a really good idea. Just my 2 cents. Sorry.
I think that's a great bit of table setting because we're big believers in frameworks as well. So we have all of 20 minutes to explore cyber insurance and compliance. No problem, right? I think this is one of the things that we are seeing these days is a fair amount of overlap between the 2 disciplines, right? Both insurers and regulators are kind of getting a little tougher on their requirements for the kind of what we're doing on cyber defense, but they're also spending a lot more attention on the recovery side of things. I think they understand that in an age where cyber criminals are using AI tools like ChatGPT, that can bring ingenuity and automation to their attacks, a lot more scale. That the likelihood that an attack is going to get through is much higher. So what we do to recover, prepare ourselves, how we respond is as important. So there's, when we talk about cyber insurance requirements, a lot of that work goes a long way in helping us achieve regulatory compliance as well. All right, so what I kind of was going to propose for our discussion is let's talk a little bit about the lay of the land, kind of where we're at. And then later on, maybe we can talk about some tactics, some practical measures businesses can take, both on the insurance qualification side and the regulatory compliance side, and maybe pick some priority areas for them to focus on. It's a big task, so a little triage advice is always welcome. So, Joe, why don't you start with kind of laying out where we are in the cyber insurance landscape, why premiums and qualification requirements have gotten so much tougher?
Oh, that's easy. They're losing money is really what that's the easiest answer, right? So cyber insurance companies, I'll say at my level, like we're not the Rhodes Scholars of the financial services worlds, but at the very top end, obviously you have a bunch of very, very smart people who are looking at historically what has happened. And now they're looking in the future and they're going, how do we even begin to quantify the risk of, let's say, AI or cyber war, right? Or then combining those elements, AI plus social engineering. So pretty much the insurance industry is going, hey, we've been losing money. It hasn't been super profitable, but it's a growing industry. We all have to jump into it. But moving forward, obviously, we want to limit our losses wherever we practically can, right? So that's why we're starting to see, I'll say, a maturation of the insurance industry where they're saying things like, hey, we're not going to cover claims coming from legacy hardware or software systems. We're not going to cover claims if you don't patch your system, right? And there's analogies. It sounds scary in the cyber context, but it's analogous to every other line of insurance, right? Like if you don't have a roof on your house, we're not going to cover damage from the rain, right? Like it just wouldn't make sense. So that's where we're seeing the cyber insurance market headed, where they're going, all right, we have some unknown and unquantifiable risks. Therefore, we need to start limiting how much insurance we're offering, what the sublimits are, increase the responsibilities of the policyholder, and that's just maturing the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I see the language on the compliance side as well, kind of shifting to much more of a proactive risk management approach. They want businesses to instrument their environments so that they can anticipate threats a little bit better. And as I mentioned, there's a lot more emphasis on the recovery side, the assumption, the inevitability of a breach, a successful cyber attack, and that your preparations, how you respond to that, how you recover, how systematic and programmatic you are about things like disaster recovery and incident response. We're actually seeing language in the regulatory frameworks about that. I imagine we're seeing similar things from insurers as well.
Oh, absolutely. Right. It makes sense that they're going, hey, let's do what we can to try and get controls on the front end, but also we got to have some measure on the back end to try and limit those losses. Right. So we're even now seeing regulators actually demanding really hyper specific controls. So, for example, New York came out and said, hey, if you're 20 million in revenue, you fall under this particular statute, you now have to have a PAM solution. And that kind of knocked me over. I was like, wow, that's the first time I've seen really what would be considered maybe like a higher end control actually mandated by law. But yeah, you're right that they're really worried about, okay, what happens after the event, right? So is there a way that we can, one, try and prevent it, but if we can't, because there's so many variables here, how do we limit the damage on the back end? Because fundamentally that's going to, will really limit how much the insurance company has to pay out. But also for the company, it actually makes a lot of sense. So from my shoes, I start thinking about, all right, if you can limit damage, well, then that's a lower cost of a cyber event, which means your premium's not going to go up as high, which means you're going to be more competitive. That also means it starts lowering your risks of a big event. So now regulatory action, class action claims, all that stuff starts getting tampered down, which obviously for the insurance company is good. They don't want to be shelling out those millions if they don't have to. But also for the company, it is absolutely in your best interest. So it's, I don't know, the IT world is hard. I used to be an IT guy. So I understand it's kind of the hidden hand, right? Like I remember being an IT guy where everything worked and they were like, what do we pay you for? And then when something broke, they're like, what do we pay you for? And I'm sure
No
everybody
good deed
here
goes unpunished.
Exactly. But if you've never been through a full-blown cyber event, I would not wish that on my worst enemy. There are so many variables and so many compounding factors, and the stress and the time and the money that gets poured into that. You just don't want to do it. So I always tell people when it comes to controls, right? It's, hey, do everything you reasonably can. Like we're seeing requirements now for, EDR, encryption, MFA for email access, vulnerability assessments, patch management, et cetera, right? And I just tell people, hey, a good year is when I talk to you once and I take your money. Because if we're talking twice, you're having a really bad day and it's about to get worse. So yeah, start getting proactive. It's just going to make your life simpler. And then you don't have to worry so much that, hey, 7 days before your cyber insurance renewal, suddenly you have this laundry list of controls you have to implement, which, from the IT guy perspective, it's yeah, it's not that simple, right? It's not like downloading a program and ready go. From the business owner perspective, they may not get that. So IT guys out there, start making the business case for all of these controls. And I think it's going to make your lives a million times easier moving forward.
Yeah, I look at almost with a little bit of envy at our counterparts in Europe, where the regulations coming down the pike are holding IT senior executives um, criminally and financially responsible if there's a breach that happens because the company basically uh, was derelict in their duty to secure their IT infrastructure and protect customer patient data, whatever. And I I tell those audiences like, oh, that's actually an advantage for you if you're looking to get the kind of executive sponsorship and budget approvals and reinforcement of policies from the top down that makes these projects a little bit easier to get through. I'm actually kind of wishing we had a little bit more of that in North America, because I think it really makes it easier for those of us that have to implement these controls, put the processes together to get that kind of support. It's like, boss, I'm just trying to keep you out of jail. So
Actually, late last year, the very first case in that vein actually occurred where the FTC, under the Drizzly case, so that's
yes, I remember
DRIZLY,
this.
they personally went after the CEO, right? So I would say, and that was for it's like the Uber of alcohol, I think was kind of their
Yeah,
tagline.
exactly. In fact, Uber bought them.
Yeah, so if that can happen to him, that could definitely happen to your company. I think they were 40 million in revenue or something around there.
Yeah.
So not a super huge company. So I would say every IT guy, man, you're out there, take a look at that Drizzly case. I have a whole video about it on my YouTube channel. Take that to the boss, because that could apply to you and the CFO and the CEO and the CIO, CISO, CTO. I mean, on and on. So yeah, you are personally at risk, and I think that was just the first shot across the bow, but we're getting there. The law's getting
And
there.
that was about failure to notify, I think, right? That they had a series of breaches and they basically concealed them from regulators and investors, and that's what they got their feet held to the fire by. Is that correct? I think
Yeah, but
what I recall about that case.
that was part of it, but it even gets into, hey, the CEO is ultimately responsible, and they were using a method of encryption that was cryptologically broken, right? Which for the average CEO, they're not going to understand cryptology,
Right.
and so that I thought was a big wake up call, where it's like, hey, board of directors, CEO, you have CFO exposure under the new SEC guidelines. There's a lot of exposure here, and so kicking the IT guy back into his closet, that's not good. He's actually a strategic partner with your business to limit not only business losses, but like personal losses, and personal consent orders that will follow in the case of Drizzly, that CEO for a decade. So if he wants to get a new job, good luck, right? It's either he does what he does or he sells hot dogs. There's nothing in between he's going to be able to do. So hopefully
I
that
think
woke some people up.
I think there's a lot of people in our audience that will be very behind that sentiment. That we're strategic partners in IT. We're not just plumbing.
Yes.
On the same subject, I'm starting to see language around. You mentioned a bunch of specific technologies that are getting explicitly name checked these days. When you see EDR and disaster recovery and vulnerability assessment and patch management cited in the standards, that feels kind of new. I'm also seeing language in regulatory frameworks that talk specifically about AI and automation. Now, I spent a lot of time on
Sure.
behalf of Acronis in online venues like this, talking about how cyber criminals are using ChatGPT and other AI tools to make their phishing emails look perfect, to help them evade anti-phishing, anti-spam defense mechanisms, how to scale up their attacks, how to write malicious code. There are a dozen different ways that they're applying the technology. and we're playing catch up a little bit on that. Yeah, are we seeing something similar in insurance? As insurance, are insurers calling out those kind of requirements, saying, "Look, your adversaries are using these technologies. You've got to get on board with them too." I see regulatory language that now explicitly calls those out. Are you seeing something similar on the insurance side yet?
Not yet, but I can tell you the inside baseball, they're absolutely terrified of AI. Like I mean, just trying to wrap our heads around how bad that could make the problem. I would be shocked if in, say, 3 years, it's not a requirement to have some type of control that is supposed to detect AI. I mean, I'll eat my hat if that doesn't come out, because they're terrified. They're terrified of the social engineering aspect and the huge sums of money, like that $25 million deepfake Zoom issue that came out of somewhere over in Southeast Asia. I mean, they're absolutely terrified. I think the insurance industry they're trying to figure out how to attack the problem on a large scale. But I would say for every company out there, you got to start attacking that problem on your own, right? That could be, hey, taking a look again at those internal controls you have around wiring money is always a good one, right? So we call them idiot checks, but it's like, hey, you got to go to somebody else before you send out 25 million and go, hey, just make sure I'm not being an idiot here. Is this legitimate or not? Right. And I understand that slows down the speed of business, but 25 million is a lot of money. So
Yeah, we've seen a couple of examples of like deepfake voice and deepfake video being used to convince lower level employees that they're talking to senior executives or board members, telling them to wire these large sums offshore in Zoom calls, right? In not just voice
yeah.
calls. So it's a legit concern. All right, time is flying here. I wanted to get to the kind of practical advice kind of phase of the discussion here. What's a kind of a thumbnail version of what our business and IT managers in the audience ought to be focusing on if they're working towards this kind of common goal of qualifying for cyber insurance and meeting the regulatory compliance requirements?
Yeah. So I always tell people, and I talk a lot about, hey, what are insurance companies requiring? What's coming down the pike, trying to forecast that. My first kind of point to people is, hey, push that aside, right? And start looking at your own business and say, okay, what are our risks? So do a risk assessment and now start saying, okay, where are we? What are our risks? Where we need to be, right? And then you just start chipping away at it, because that's going to make your life infinitely easier. Also makes my life easier. So it's somewhat for myself as well. But it's, hey, if we're waiting for this giant behemoth bureaucracies that are insurance companies to say, now you shall have MDR or EDR, right, in the next 2 weeks, it's like, you're already kind of behind the ball if you're waiting for the behemoth to tell you that. That means they've already seen the losses, they already have the actuarial data, and your business is already at risk. So I tell people, hey, yes, if a new cyber insurance requirement comes out, you got to do it. But the easy answer is, hey, just do it before you have to, right? So something like EDR, for example, how does that not make sense from a business perspective, right? Like to me, it's like, all right, well, let's lower how far or limit how far that exposure can go. It's going to limit the cost of a breach. It's going to make you more competitive at renewal. It's not going to jack up your premiums, throw you back into the open market. It's going to lower the odds. You have big class action claims, media exposure, regulatory investigations, all that type of stuff. So yeah, I'd say, keep tabs on it, but the more proactive you can be in terms of defense, right, and making that business case to the executives and the board, the easier everyone's life's going to be, right? Because I would not want to be in the chair of a guy that is the director at a large company, and then I've got 7 days to implement EDR. That might mess up Thanksgiving. So yeah, try and be as proactive as you possibly can. And on the IT side, start thinking about your own liability and your own risk, right? Be proactive. be out there, tell these, these people in positions of leadership that, hey, this is what I think we need. This is why I think we need it, right? Let's have a talk. Let's see if it fits in the budget. If not, let's have a plan of action and implementation, right? So we can just start chipping away at this problem.
All right, quick thoughts on the recovery side. You talked about endpoint and EDR.
Mhm.
How about on the other side of at the right-hand side of the cybersecurity framework?
Oh, so what do they call it? Like right of boom. So like after an event.
Exactly.
Oh, I mean, obviously backups are going to be huge. Immutable backups. Obviously, you have to, one, secure your backups, but two, have immutable backups. We're already seeing that as a requirement on some cyber insurance policies for obvious reasons. It's because backups got burned, ergo, insurance company paid out way more money. Now the company, they're in dire straits fundamentally if they just have nothing left. So even something simple as immutable backups, man, please start doing that as soon as you possibly can, because I'll get more sleep at night, and your company's going to be way better off.
All right, Joe. I wish we had another half hour for this, but we've got to keep rolling here. I hope you'll stick around for questions, because I'm sure the audience is going to have a bunch for you. Thanks once again, and I'll say back to you, Fernanda.
Thank you so much, James and Joe. That was a very insightful session. I actually do see we already got a few questions when it comes to insurance. So up next, we are pleased to welcome one of the most influential industry analysts of IT infrastructure. So Phil Goodwin is the Research Vice President at IDC and has more than 40 years of industry experience, including 25 focused on data protection software as an analyst and solutions architect. He's the lead author of IDC recent worldwide market space report on cyber recovery solution, which is going to be reviewed today. And I am thrilled to share that this report places Acronis on the top right corner. So that's the leader category, which is where every vendor would like to be. So without further ado, here's Phil Goodwin.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and many thanks to the Acronis team for inviting me as a guest speaker today. I do want to, during this session, if we could go ahead and advance the slide, please. During this session, I really want to cover four things. First of all, what is cyber recovery and the importance of that within the context of the NIST framework. So I'll also be talking about the difference between cyber recovery and disaster recovery, because there are really some key differences there. And then how to use that NIST framework to really help develop what it is an appropriate response mechanism for your organization. And then, as the introduction said, spend a little bit of time on the worldwide cyber recovery marketscape published by IDC late in 2023. So if we move forward again, please. There are three types of ransomware attacks that organizations need to deal with. The first and probably the most common that I think people are most familiar with are the data attacks, where they encrypt, corrupt, or delete data. But there's also data exfiltration, where data gets stolen and threatened to be put out on the dark web or exposed. Those attacks are actually increasing at about twice the rate of the data attacks. Because if you think about it, once the bad guys have your information, there's really nothing you can do. You either pay the ransom or you pay the consequences. And then the last is command and control. And I can tell you that this one doesn't get nearly enough attention. The Colonial Pipeline attack was a very complex attack, but it included elements of command and control. So it's really taking control of edge devices. I can also tell you that about 50% of incidents where attackers get into the system, the first thing they do is attack the backup. Because again, if they can eliminate your ability to recover, it increases the chances that you're going to have to pay the ransom. So really four things that we recommend organizations look for in their cyber preparedness. The first is absolute data survivability, and that includes encryption, air gap, and of course, immutability is another element of that. The second is do everything you can to keep the bad guys out, but realize they're going to get in, and you have to be prepared for both. The other is rapid detection. When most of the damage occurs is when the attackers have been in there for a period of weeks or months. So detect them quickly. And then the third is to have mechanisms to recover rapidly and really minimize that downtime. So again, advance the slide, please. One of the things that we find as a problem for most organizations, and the reason they have difficulty combating cyber crime and recovering quickly, is that they apply disaster recovery responses to a cyber recovery situation. But there are really some very key differences. For example, with disaster recovery, you assume that your backups are valid and that everything is okay with them. In cyber recovery, you have to assume that it's bad. You also can use a run book in disaster recovery, but in cyber recovery, you really don't know what's been attacked, how it's been attacked, or how many of the systems have been attacked. We also know that disasters are somewhat definable. When it's over, whether it's a hurricane or a fire or any other kind of disaster. When it's over, it's over. In terms of cyber recovery, that's not true. In many cases, when we're trying to recover systems, the bad guys are still in there. They're still traversing the network and other systems. So you have to assume that the bad guys are in there, and you have to go through those very important steps. And if we could go to the next slide, please. We know that there are also some very important differences between the process that you would go through for disaster recovery versus the process that you go through for cyber recovery. And I'm not going to go through every one of these bullet points. You can certainly look at them and see them, but there are a couple that are very important. On the right-hand panel, you'll see things like conduct forensic analysis. You would never do that in a disaster recovery situation. But in this case, you have to know what the attack was, how extensive the attack was, really whether or not it was impactful. Because sometimes, like in exfiltration, sometimes the bad guys will download a whole lot of data, but it's worthless data, so you don't really care. But you need forensic analysis to know that. You also need to establish an isolated sandbox, another key difference from disaster recovery. And this is because you have to have an environment where it's completely cut off from any outside accessibility to assure that you have that clean place to test, to analyze, and to start to stage the recovery. So next slide, please. One of the ways that IDC frames this is really using the NIST framework, and that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a U.S. government institution. It's something that I think a lot of organizations, even outside the U.S., can relate to because it does establish that framework. And the framework is really based on 5 pillars, which are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now, the data protection tends to be reactive, whereas data security is really proactive, trying to keep the bad guys out. So those two things really have to be integrated. Unfortunately, in most organizations, data protection is handled by IT ops and data security is handled by the SecOps teams, but they really have to be fully integrated. And what I mean by that, if we go on to the next slide, please, is you can see here that within these 5 different pillars, there are really elements of both data security and data protection that help to address the full requirements. Now, I can tell you there is no vendor out there that has every single one of these, none. And so it's very important to have an organization or a partner or a vendor supplier that can bring a lot of these elements together and at least coordinate them so that you have both the proactive side of data security as well as the absolute assurance of being able to recover your system when something bad happens. Next slide, please. At the very beginning of my introduction, we told you about the worldwide cyber recovery MarketScape. This is a vendor assessment tool that IDC applies Certainly Gartner has theirs, Forrester has theirs. This happens to be IDC's. And it's really our way to help organizations to develop shortlists, to understand who the key players are, and to really find the solution that is most appropriate for their particular environment. We evaluate vendors based on two criteria. One is capabilities, and the other one is strategy. In other words, how good is the product today, but how well is it going to be able to keep up with requirements for the future? So the next slide, please. What we wanted to do with this is really get the world-class players and evaluate them for this. And so we looked at their organizations. We had 10 different criteria, which included size of organization. You know, they have to be big enough to be stable and capable of supporting organizations. They had to have a worldwide presence in order to address the needs of multinationals. But they also had to have the ability to address the needs of small to medium businesses all the way up to large-scale enterprises, and to be able to do that in a way that was effective. So in the next slide, we can see here what those results were. And you know, as the tip-off was at the very beginning here, Acronis was named one of the leaders. We're very impressed with the balance that Acronis had between its capabilities, or the capabilities of its product, as well as the strategy for moving forward. And in many ways, we felt the organization addressed those unique characteristics very, very well. So with that, I will turn this back over to the Acronis team. This is my contact information. I do love to hear from people. You're welcome to give me a ring. But again, very, very many thanks to the Acronis team for the time today.
Thank you so much, Phil. Great report that you presented to us. And, you know, maybe we should get a t-shirt that has that says like top right representatives IDC report. Thanks again. And please stay with us for the Q&A later on. Okay, so before we continue, here is another poll question, and this one is about your company direct expertise with ransomware attacks. So we got the poll here for you. We'll leave that for a few minutes. And you know, I feel like while you're doing so, answering the question, I imagine that you've seen the recent news story about the ransomware attack on United Health here in the US. So that's a very serious incident. The company's subsidiary, Change Health, plays the critical role in fulfillment of half of the US medical prescriptions, and the ransomware attack has put it offline for weeks. We keep seeing it on the news, all of the effects that it's causing still. And so patients cannot get prescription filled. Hospitals are not getting paid. And United Health is now facing a federal government inquiry, lawsuits, and a big dent in the stock market. So let's take a look now at the poll results on the direct experience with the ransomware. Okay, so majority here answer, we have no evidence of an attempt attack, so that's 33%. And then the second one here is an attack succeeded, but we recovered without pain. Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you everybody for the answer. Okay, so as we continue, I am happy to introduce Pat Hurley. He's our Acronis VP and GM here of Americas. Many of you probably know Pat really well, given his extensive 15-year career here, where he has taken numerous leadership roles. So today, Pat is going to talk about the challenges of building cyber resilience in many of the key areas of commerce, industry that Acronis has focused on with our latest release of Acronis Cyber Protect. The stage is yours, Pat.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. And then classic Acronis style, they're going to make me go live. So hopefully you're seeing the proper presentation screen here.
Yes,
Thank you for the warm introduction. I don't feel a day over 90 years old, Fernando, so thank you for that. But as noted earlier, I run the Americas here for Acronis. Been here for about 15 years, been a tremendous ride and tremendous progression in terms of the capabilities of our portfolio. So it's really been fun to be a part of. So we'll jump right into it here. This is not going to be really, it shouldn't be surprising or new data, right? I think seeing the reaction to the poll results there was pretty interesting that a large portion have not been attacked, and those that had been attacked were able to recover without paying. It's fantastic news, but I think the general response to that is not a question of if, but rather when. And what we're seeing is that the challenges of addressing that are going to become harder and harder. We keep reminding our customers and our partners about these phenomena that happen, pretty much daily in the market. Budgets are squeezed, talent is tough to get, and then it's tough to keep, especially cybersecurity talent. More and more systems and applications need to be supported. New threats exist pretty much every single day. Downtime is extremely expensive, which we'll go through in some future slides here. And it doesn't discriminate, right? These attacks don't discriminate against company size or region, location. It's pretty much everywhere. If you're online, your potential to be infiltrated exists. So we'll talk about some of these trends throughout the industry, starting specifically with SMBs. And what this statistic says here basically is that within 6 months of a breach, 60% of SMBs will actually go out of business. So minimizing your actual downtime has never been more important. Again, for SMBs, it's critically important. And think about their access to the proper types of technology, the budgets they have available, and the type of staff they can have addressing it. The costs of a breach are obviously staggering, but they can sometimes be even more than staggering. They can be completely devastating, putting your companies out of business. Average downtime costs about $50,000 per minute. In the typical commercial enterprise, downtime costs about $300,000 per hour. Again, this varies. It's an average, but it varies across different industries and opportunities. Some car makers even estimate their downtimes to be well over $10 million an hour, right? So critically important that they don't have this type of a mess on their hands on the assembly line. Should there be a breach, should there be an attack, should there be downtime. It's even costlier in the industrial space. Beyond car factories, think about steel production manufacturing, think about oil rigs, oil production, chemical manufacturing, et cetera. Some of those can have over $5 million an hour of actual downtime costs. Some car makers, again, estimate that cost to be in the range of $10 million per hour. It's absolutely astonishing. But the point is data breaches are getting more and more expensive. Per IBM's recent cost of data breach report, losses from the average attack are right around $4.5 million. And in healthcare, they can approach up to $11 million, as Fernanda had just noted with the recent attack against United Health. Quite costly, not just for the business, but the consumer of what they do. Reaching a little bit further, like I just mentioned earlier, the cost of ransomware attacks in large enterprise are now mentioned in the hundreds of millions of dollars, as opposed to years ago in the hundreds of thousands of dollars or single-digit millions of dollars. In October 2023, we saw the MGM Hotel and Hotel and Casino Resort get hit with about $100 million in cost. Clorox in August 2023 hit with about $350 million of costs associated with a breach. So again, they're getting more and more expensive. The costs are not going to go down. The threat landscape is continually increasing. You need to take the proper types of action. As Phil had mentioned earlier today, right? It's a broad area they need to cover, and they're now starting to use terms as opposed to data protection and disaster recovery. They're now using terms like cyber protection and cyber recovery, which is something Acronis has been talking about for well on over a decade now. But good news. That's why we're all here today, right? We have a solution for you, Acronis Cyber Protect 16, now live and available. It's the core platform for businesses that integrate cybersecurity, data protection, and complete endpoint management. Helps businesses to build a true cyber resilience. That's all based, again, when we build our products here, it's all based on the NIST framework. We want to be able to hit every one of those pillars to be able to address those emerging needs. It defends you against a broad range of different cyber threats and other breaches that might cause downtime or potentially data loss. We know how critically important data is to running one's business, but recovering quickly from those incidents when they do occur is something that is critically important for us, right? It's not just about the backup portion of it. It's about how do you get your business back online? How do you recover from a breach? How do you make sure what you're recovering is not tainted in any sort of way, that you're recovering clean systems and data back into your infrastructure. So to that end, we're providing full lifestyle cybersecurity management. It's exactly built around frameworks like ISO 27001. The NIST CSF recommended that businesses deploy. This is the exact approach that compliance regulators are demanding, as you heard from the earlier discussion about cyber insurance, as well as what Phil just talked about from IDC. So it's the approach that industry analysts like Phil, our good friend at IDC, has identified as the most effective way to minimize data loss as well as downtime. So what's new? What can you expect Acronis to be delivered to? We're a highly innovative company. We've registered a ton of patents. We protect millions of businesses. We protect millions of workloads, right? What's really interesting for us, we're seeing a lot of organizations from the SMB up to the enterprise leverage the one-click recovery capability. This is what you probably heard in the initial opening of this session, right? Allowing anyone, anywhere, anytime to be able to recover, right? You don't necessarily need to rely on IT. One-click recovery enables a self-service aspect to the solution that allows you to recover from a ransomware attack via a boot screen. Recover any system, regardless of the age or the function. Centralized management was something that's been asked about by our enterprises for a very long time, which provides a lot of local autonomy. And advanced security, including endpoint detection and response, which is something that more and more cyber insurance providers are going to require as far as being able to qualify and retain a policy for cyber insurance. What do we do with it? Well, we help protect businesses. At the end of the day, all businesses share one thing in common. They all have data, and that data is critically important to their operations. We work with industrial IT organizations. We work with multi-site distributed enterprises. We work with small businesses that have all of their operations in one location. Across all these different segments, again, they share a lot of commonalities, but we allow you to recover any system to anywhere at any time by anyone. We allow you to do that from a centrally managed approach across a distributed enterprise. And we allow you to leverage some of the advanced security capabilities, including EDR, active protection, and other capabilities to allow you to optimize it for usability. I think one of the biggest things that we hear from our customers is the ease of use capabilities within the platform, designed in a very simple to use GUI that's delivered to our customers, that's amenable to both very sophisticated IT staff like yourselves on this call, but also maybe the unsophisticated individual that might need to do a rapid operation following a potential breach. So we're going to break it down a little bit further across a couple different segments. We'll start first with industrial IT. These are the computers that are used essentially to monitor, configure, and control operational technology. We refer to that as OT environments, and industrial control systems, right? Think of automobile manufacturers, right? Chemical and gas manufacturers, oil and gas production, different energy companies, et cetera. When computers that control these systems fail, right? The assembly line gets disrupted, the flow of oil stops on a pipeline, or production of steel shuts down. That's extremely costly to businesses. We showed some of the statistics earlier, right? Anywhere in the range of $5 to $10 million you can count on from productivity loss if there is an impact relative to a breach or to a hack. Environments are usually air-gapped for security purposes, so central IT can't always easily and efficiently remotely connect to those systems to be able to manage them, to be able to actually recover them. There's generally no local IT staff. You're dealing with operational technology staff that would have to be able to actually get their hands on the systems. You have to actually be required to dispatch some technical resources on site, potentially helicopter somebody into an oil rig or to a refinery or plant. That's obviously expensive and it takes a lot of time. It's also risky on top of the existing challenges that you've already probably faced. So what we try to do is make it super simple for non-IT staff to recover quickly from the failed machines within minutes. To reboot, you simply hold down the function key, you pick an option from the menu that pops up. The assembly is automatically rebuilt from a local backup. The assembly line or pipeline of steel production resumes immediately, minimizing downtime, reducing the overall cost of that impact on the overall business, which is why a lot of leading OT vendors will actually recommend Acronis because we are OEM'd in a lot of other services where you might be even using a white labeled Acronis solution that you're not even aware of. But we really have become kind of the de facto standard for the industrial IT recovery systems. Ryan Davis, who I've worked with for a number of years here at Acronis, he's got this talk track down very well. This is kind of his bread and butter and the types of enterprises that he works with on a daily basis. The use case I'll talk about here is obviously automobile manufacturing. So it's a classic example of this problem. One big downtime exposure lies in the computers that control IT operation systems. Those are used in highly automated assembly lines, right? Since Ford started building the car and creating the assembly line many, many years ago, it's become significantly optimized over the time, but it's heavily reliant on the technology to make sure that they're pushing a certain number of cars out the door every hour, every day, every week, every year. A computer failure brings into the assembly line a lot of challenges, most notably production halt. Volkswagen estimates that an hour of downtime costs them about $13 million. That's pretty painful, even for an organization of that size. There's no IT people on site. Air gap network means no central IT can reach the machine remotely to solve the problem. So Acronis enables OT staff and non-IT people to actually leverage the one-click recovery capabilities to get a failed industrial computer back online in minutes. We've got a case study. I'm sure we can share resources after the call. We developed one with Toyota, pretty well-recognized brand, and there's a number of other auto manufacturers, very recognizable brand names we won't discuss on this call, but they have been customers of ours for many, many years. Another big one, oil and gas production. So power plants also share similar types of problems. Remote locations, no IT staff, air-gapped environments, right? You're going to see some common trends coming up with that stuff. When a computer controls the ICS and OT fail, the industrial processes stop, right? And you can imagine how risky that is when you're hundreds of miles offshore on an oil rig. Getting IT staff to either a remote ocean site like you see in this picture here, or to a remote desert location requires expensive costs to make that happen. It takes a lot of time to get there. It's super expensive to do it. So on top of the production loss from pumping oil out of the ground, you're also dealing with additional costs on top to make sure that you're reacting to the issue that has popped up for you. What we do is very simple. We enable the refinery, the plant worker to simply and easily recover that data or recover the industrial system back online. There's not generally a lot of data that they're protecting here. It's really about uptime and production. In the event of that hardware failure, that same employee can recover a new computer within minutes using our bare metal capabilities, which have been, as Fernando referred to, something that we've offered for 100 years, which is when I started at Acronis. But again, we're widely embedded with some very well-known brands that you guys will see up on the screen here. So Honeywell, ABB, Emerson. There's some widely available materials online to talk about our capabilities within these types of industrial control players. And we have case studies of companies like ABB and Johnson Electric that are publicly consumable. Pushing forward a little bit further, we've also got transportation and logistics, right? It's also used by we're used by some of those largest organizations. The challenges are essentially the same, right? Logistics and organizations about getting shipments out the door. We help make sure that those lines are up and running, that the robots that are moving, packages from left to right are active. Again, any type of a challenge there is obviously going to come up to impact your bottom line and your results. In the manufacturing space, this is an area where we play a huge role for organization. We talk quite frequently with steel and aluminum production. We talk with industrial gas production organizations. Think about pharma, the drug manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, device manufacturing, very specific and complicated devices. You see some guys in some suits here, which are doing something with what look to be very complicated machines. I don't know what that is, but obviously from a device manufacturing standpoint, you're going to hear from actually an individual on the call today who will talk specifically about some of those use cases from their side. Again, we got published case studies with organizations like Tata Steel, based out of India, they're a steel manufacturer, and Hydro Alunorte, a Brazilian aluminium producer. Moving into healthcare, again, this was something, I don't know if Fernanda planned on doing that or if she was just reading some news articles during one of the earlier sessions, but healthcare is obviously a huge area of concern. Cyber criminals love to target this because if you think about it, you don't want to be the hospital that has to recover from a ransomware attack, but they don't do it in enough time, and patients potentially die. They're not able to address sicknesses in the right amount of time. They obviously have huge regulatory requirements, and from a compliancy standpoint, they can face fines. Breaches can cost them tens of millions of dollars. Beyond that, obviously, you're thinking about the hit to the reputation of a healthcare organization when people realize they might not have had the right types of protections in place to make sure they were able to recover from this. Again, it's It's the proactive and reactive type of approach that Phil was talking about specifically in his presentation earlier. So what do we do for healthcare organizations? Well, it's relatively simple. We're going to defend uptime and protect sensitive data against ransomware attacks. The last thing you want to do is pay for a ransom. You want to say, hey, hacker, go screw. I've got my data. It's been protected. I'm not paying your ransom. We do that by leveraging things like active protection, as well as endpoint detection and response, which allows you to bring the machine back online and also conduct a forensic review after the fact to understand where the vulnerabilities might have been and how you prevent it from happening in the future. We recover systems quickly after successful ransomware attacks or other reasons for downtime, right? This doesn't necessarily always have to be a ransomware attack. It can be a widespread outage, enabling machines to go offline. We help you bring them back online, even with capabilities like one-click recovery. Published case study here as well with Rush Memorial Hospital. Again, I urge you to check that stuff out online. A lot of materials on our website that we can share with you after the call as well. So what does it look like when you get that critical issue? Well, this is it. It's relatively simple. You hit F11, you go into the boot screen, you recover from a backup, right? And it's a protected backup that's in a hidden partition. Tell those hackers to go screw. I've got my data protected. I can come back online. So we allow, with this capability, for you to restore critically important systems within minutes. Locations with very high downtime costs are obviously an area we recommend this capability to be turned on. Those are certainly industrial sites with OT or industrial control systems. Consider distributed networks or distributed enterprises where you might not have local IT staff and franchise type environments. That's an area where we highly recommend this service to be turned on. Locations that are difficult to dispatch IT to. We talked about the oil rigs or remote locations where you might have manufacturing capabilities. Businesses which can't have downtime. Think about healthcare, right? If you have a person on an operating table and your power goes out to your hospital because of a ransomware attack, that's not something you want to be in the news for. Businesses that have a ton of branch offices, think retail organizations, think franchise operations. It goes beyond manufacturing a car. It then gets out to selling it in the different retail locations distributed across all sorts of different locations. Standalone specialty devices, think ATMs, right? People want to get access to their money. They're in a rush to get stuff done. You want to make sure those ATMs are online. Businesses with large work from home populations, right? Your IT department can't be there to fix a problem if they can't connect to your computer remotely. This enables that individual to turn on the self-service capabilities and really take ownership of their own capabilities. Again, this doesn't always have to be a ransomware attack. This can be hardware failures. It can be software issues. It can be human errors. We don't like to admit it a lot, but humans do make mistakes. I've even made a few in my day. Multi-site enterprise. I want to touch a little bit about this. What we do with our Cyber Protect 16 offering is that we build cyber resilience in highly distributed enterprises that face unique challenges, right? Tech environments can vary quite wildly from location to location, especially in business units that grow by acquisition. And IT wants to consolidate stack. They need to get access to those machines. It's very distributed. It's a quite complicated scenario to try to deal with. Local management of IT operations and security may make more sense, obviously leveraging local expertise. There's certainly differences in regulatory environments across different countries and regions, language challenges, of course, high local security requirements that might have certain limitations or prevention from remote access to machines from a distributor or remote headquarters. And then you deal with bandwidth issues, right? I know it's improving over time and Starlink is providing a lot of different capabilities there, but it's still an issue for some limited locations that have challenges getting access to the internet. So from a distributed enterprise perspective, obviously we're addressing branch offices and retail, we're addressing healthcare, think hotels, resorts, casino properties, anything in the hospitality business. Independent lines of business. I mentioned franchises earlier, obviously companies that operate in a multinational type of setup. Think subsidiaries of much larger holding companies that would have challenges kind of dealing with these issues firsthand. And acquisitions, right? Consolidating multiple organizations into one different organization is obviously a challenge for it. So we create this very cool visualization. We are your toggle switch to have control over complex issues, allowing for multi-site management, multi-tool management, addressing local compliance issues, dealing with the limited budgets, resources, people, time to address all these issues. We distribute our our network across multiple data centers. We have 54 data centers across the globe. This is our own infrastructure with Acronis Cyber Infrastructure, as well as Azure, Google, and the other hyperscalers that are available in the market today. So we do leverage them to allow access and control of data. Where do you want to send your data? Obviously addressing most notably local data sovereignty concerns. So we have a long-standing solution for Acronis Cyber Protect. This is an expansion of that offering. With this new offering today, we now enable services like endpoint detection and response, right? This is allowing small businesses and mid-sized organizations to streamline attack investigations, prioritize incident response, reducing alert fatigue, remediate incidents automatically automatically with a single click, with one-click restore, being able to analyze, correlate, and interpret incidents and be able to respond to them in minutes. I touched upon forensic analytics earlier and how to prevent future attacks, covering up those holes. Reap the benefits of integration with other Acronis data protection capabilities and endpoint management tools. And obviously align your cyber resilience regime with the NIST framework, being able to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover in one integrated solution. So what are we? We're the most secure solution. We're an award-winning solution. We're secure, we're fast, we're efficient, we're complete, we're fully integrated. I don't think we talk about this enough. We're integrated with so many different tools. I think we have 260 plus different integrations that are available today. It's all integrated across one single agent. No conflicts, perfect balance of data protection across all the NIST vectors. And we're innovated. I think I mentioned this earlier. We have a bunch of patents. We started active protection, and we started using terms like cyber protection, cyber backup, cyber recovery many, many years ago. It's great to see them finally being adopted by the experts in the industry like Phil and others across the industry or analyst space. So thank you for your time today. I'm going to stop talking now. I know the team is going to yell at me for going over my time, but I appreciate it. And thanks so much for coming today.
Thanks, Pat, for giving us the overview on the challenges that our customers face in terms of cyber resilience, which is a good time to transition to how Acronis is addressing those issues. So we'll hear from Stephen Nichols, a seasoned technology problem solver who managed the Acronis Solutions Engineer team in North America. So a lot of the customers here on the call get to talk to Stephen Nichols' team here, and he will walk us through the Acronis Cyber Protect 16. So take it away, Stephen.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, we've talked a lot about theoretically, some of the things that are going on. What I'd like to do now is kind of get into the weeds a little bit and show you what the solution actually looks like. So we're going to start with endpoint detection and response, or EDR. And this is when we've deployed the management server in the cloud. So this means you're using the ones that are being hosted in the Acronis Cyber Cloud. So the first thing that we're looking at here is this is the information. So that's just about identifies. This is about knowing what's going on. So we can see the alerts. We've got some some areas at the top that kind of give us a picture, and we've got a number of incidents below. So obviously this is our demo environment. So we can see all the different types of information. We've run a bunch of simulated attacks. And this helps us to kind of understand what's going on in the environment as a whole. But I can then filter that down, and let's just look at the ones that haven't been mitigated yet, right? So we're quickly going to again re-poll the environment. We're going to just pull those results. We're going to update all the charts, and we're going to update that list to just the unmitigated incidents. And if we actually click on one of those incidents, it's going to pull up a little bit more detail, and we can sort of begin to understand what's happened. We started out by, we're going to start an investigation. So we're going to go in and we can actually change the status of this to the fact that we're investigating, so we can keep track. It's also important, maybe you've got multiple technicians. We can go ahead and assign this out to a particular technician. If we're the ones that are working on it, we can actually just select ourselves from the list. That way we know exactly, who's doing that investigation. So more importantly, now we're going to dive into the incident itself. Once we see the incident, we're going to see a couple of things. First, on the left-hand side, we have a really easy to understand explanation in chronological order, breaking down the types of activities that happened This makes it really easy to be able to quickly understand the nature of the attack, what happened, what systems might have been vulnerable, was there any, again, those different types of attacks, was there information, is it command and control, all of those types of things. We can then go down and we can see all the different categories. You see that they're color coded. We can begin to understand and then correlate those over. And once we click on one of those actions, we can actually see even more detail about exactly what happened. Now, if we roll up to the device itself, again, earlier it was alluded to, a lot of times we're trying to mitigate this while the threat actors are still active. So we've got some response actions that we can do at the device level. And this is really about being able to make some quick changes. Do we want to be able to run a forensic backup to understand what those vulnerabilities are? Do we want to be able to eliminate access to that system? Do we want to be able to, there's a bunch of things that we can actually do at the device level to help mitigate. And in some cases, we could actually, for example, isolate the machine, run a backup, and then power it off. And that way, we're going to be able to then, go and have access to that data as it actually is, as opposed to, trying to go back and forth with the bad guys trying to basically cover their tracks. But once we've established that, this actually is an incident, we've done the, that immediate kind of triage of the threat in order to, eliminate what the risks are. We've maybe initiated a forensic backup so we can get additional information. We can now look at the incident as a whole, and we can go in and begin to remediate that incident. So one of the I call it the easy button that we have up in the top right-hand corner here, and that's going to give us some ability to see some of these things that are in this remediation step here, but in more of a kind of a wizard format, and that makes it much easier. Once that investigation is done, to be able to look at that remediation in a holistic way. So let's go ahead and close this out. We're going to look at the actual incident remediation. So the first thing we can see here is, if it is a false positive, we can go ahead and mark it as a false positive. But if we've done our investigation, we're pretty sure that this actually is. We've got a number of steps here that we can actually do. So once we've selected to quarantine those threats, make sure that they're not a problem, we can actually roll back and depending on the type of attack, maybe there's just some registry files that were changed or files that were downloaded. We can often actually, even without getting into recovery, we can address that. More importantly, though, sometimes we're going to need to do a recovery. We can either do a disaster recovery where we spin that workload up in the cloud, or we can actually go in and make sure that if there was a vulnerability, we're applying those patches. We can apply them to multiple machines and then do that recovery. We're looking at being able to protect it not just from the immediate threat, but going forward. And it is a really important kind of thing that we need to think about, is making sure that we've taken all of the steps that we can. We can then say, yep, if we've remediated that, we can actually now say we're done. We can put a few notes in case we want to go back and look at this in the future. And then we can just hit the remediate button. Now let's cancel out of that. So that's just a quick introduction to some of the things we can do in our EDR endpoint detection and response. Pat also talked a little bit about the centralized dashboard. So when you've got a number of Acronis management servers maybe deployed on premise across different locations, whether they're in the same country or even spread it across the globe, being able to really understand the information, to be able to see your devices, your alerts and activities in a centralized location becomes really important to be able to actively protect. So in that dashboard, we can certainly go in and filter. We can make sure that we're choosing exactly what we want to see. Now, we've only got one of them set up here, but you have multiples. You could drill down and say, yeah, I want to see the data from a particular location. It's also important that you can choose kind of where that what does time scale look like. So here we've kind of got just a default setting, but we can go in and change that to a much different time scale. So let's go in and look at a much smaller time scale. Then we'll actually change the granularity. And once we apply that, it's going to, again, pull that same data, it allows us to kind of narrow down when we've got that, an issue or a challenge. We can see when exactly it took place. And the other thing, sometimes you want to look at it at a broader level. So let's we can change that out and look at that up to a year. Now this there isn't data for a full year, but it will display up to a full year worth of data. Now obviously I can I'm going to want to address this issue, so I can actually go out and log into the particular management server where these workloads are residing. And that's going to give me the ability to now take action on these alerts, because being able to have the visibility is important, but it's also important to be able to go out and find that particular device and easily locate it. So when I clicked on the device, it's going out, it's logging into that management server, and it's going to allow me to take a look at those broad number of incidents, like where exactly are they occurring. You see they're kind of spread out. One of them obviously is related to a challenge with a successful backup, but most of them are actually detection. So we see it's taking us right to that device. But if we go up and we looking at the alerts, we saw those alerts come in the centralized dashboard. Now we're seeing that same information at this particular more lower down level. And they're going to correlate. But if I go back into my devices, now I can get really down into the granular, and I can actually look and see exactly what is going on, and be able to take action and remediate that particular thing. Now, it's also important sometimes that we want to be able to, kind of manage what information is being displayed to make sure that everything is exactly what you want, and that you have, access to that. So you do have the ability to, edit, adjust that information that's being displayed. You can drill into any of the charts or tables, and then be able to do some configuration. For example, you can change which columns appear, meaning that if you've got particular information that's going to help you to be able to troubleshoot quickly at that upper level, and not have to drill in as to all the time to be able to see that detail, you can add that in here. And then you can build those as well, some of those charts out, so they're not just displaying that data in the form of information, but it actually starts to build out things like pie graphs and bar charts, because humans often can more quickly interpret information if it's presented in a graphical way, as opposed to it just being presented as raw information. So that's also something that's built into the centralized management. It's a really powerful tool. It still allows you to maintain autonomy at each of those individual sites, but it doesn't mean you no longer have to hunt and pack into each of them to be able to see alerts, device information, things like that. You really can customize how that information is brought in centrally, and means that you get a high degree of visibility, which helps to support that sort of NIST framework, because it is about being proactive. It's about knowing that information ahead of time before you have a problem, as opposed to waiting until you actually have a problem. So certainly one of the key elements of Cyber Protect 16. And the last thing I want to touch on real quick is what we talked about a couple of times, is one-click recovery. And this is really an excellent tool. So the first thing I want to show is where you would enable this. So it's actually managed from that centralized protection plan. So that's that set of instructions sent out to the agent that says, what should be backed up, where is it going to be stored, how long do we want to keep it. So within the protection plan, in the backup settings, we can actually go in, and under backup options, there is a section called one-click recovery. So we can see we've already got it turned on here. We can also enable a recovery password. This is a great idea in order just to make sure, from a security point of view. So it's a good idea to also have a password in place, and then they're going to be prompted for that during a recovery. So once we've got that set up, we've applied that plan. We've got that backup, whether it's to a secure zone or whether it's to just a local storage or even the cloud. It's important. But once that's the case, you're just going to boot the machine, hold down the F11 key. That's then going to boot into a boot manager. We can actually see here what's going to happen is it takes us through. It's going to take just a couple of seconds to a minute to actually load everything. What it's doing is it's loading a lightweight version of an operating system that's specifically for recovery. This is important because that even if you have a ransomware attack, you are still able to boot this because it's not dependent on the operating system that was initially running on the device. This is, it is actually, loading that unique operating system. We now have a couple of different choices that we can go through. So the easiest choice, obviously, is just to recover, do a full recovery from the most recent backup. But there may be occasions where we want to select a different backup to be able to recover from. That's always an option as well. And then we can actually, if you want, we can go in and do a more granular recovery. We can make a more manual process. And then if for some reason you ended up in here and you don't want to actually go through that recovery process, you can just reboot, not hit the F11, and that's going to take you just through the normal process of booting. But instead, let's go ahead and just do that full recovery. It's going to give you a prompt. We said no because I want to show you a couple other things, but it would go through and actually reboot, do that recovery. It's going to load up that recovery manager, and once it's loaded that, it's basically getting ready to do that recovery. So right now it's looking at that backup, and then I can go ahead and say, yep, I want to recover. Again, it's going to give me a couple of minutes where it's loading in that backup, preparing it. But let's go ahead and say let's not actually continue with this recovery, so we can take a look at what some of those other options look like. So if I go ahead and instead of going to the first option, I want to have a little bit more granular control. Let's go down and say I want to do a more manual recovery. Again, it's going to load that same operating system. It's going to load that same screen for me. But this time I can actually go in and I can choose to recover more granularly. I can click on that and it's going to bring up my options for me, and I can take a look. So fortunately, can't show you everything today, but hopefully that kind of whets your appetite. Thank you very much, and I'll turn things back over to Fernanda. We'll see you in a couple of minutes in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And it's great to see the product in action. And everybody, we actually have a trial for you. So if we can move to the next slide, thank you. This was just a quick preview of the new features of the Acronis Cyber Protect. So if you are interested, so please give it a test drive yourself. Take advantage of the 30 days free trial. So just scan that QR code over there. And let's transition. Let's make sure you guys keep your questions coming. Our team keeps answering them. As later we're gonna get everybody back into to the stage. And for our last session before our live Q&A, we have two people who have been working in the trenches of cyber resilience for decades. So Ryan Davis is our Acronis Senior Director of Large Enterprises and has worked with many of the industrial and large enterprise customers that Pat talked about earlier. Alan Conboy is the Field CTO of longtime Acronis partner Scale Computing, where he brings a vast experience in the areas of hyperconvergence and edge computing. So Ryan and Alan are going to explore for you the actual application of Acronis cyber resilience solution, the successes and the lessons learned. So gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you, Fernanda. Appreciate the introduction and really excited to have Alan on here for a brief chat. We've heard from the analysts as to what they think about in the context of necessary for cyber resilience through Phil's presentation on the cyber recovery leaders. We saw Pat talk about the use cases and why we believe we're the best, and a little demonstration from Stephen about our product. Hopefully what we can get into a little bit today with Alan is the trends driving the need for these technologies and maybe even some real world examples of how they apply. So Alan, we're a couple of old heads. We've been in this space for, as Fernanda said, a couple of decades. What are you seeing now that's driving either investment or a recognition that organizations need to elevate their capabilities in this space?
It's funny when you talk about SMB, as several folks did earlier, along with distributed enterprise, or as I like to refer to it, edge computing, computing that takes place where people actually do things. I don't know about you, but I've never done business in the hollowed halls of a data center. You find that the need for cyber protection and facilitating people who don't have the acronyms VCP and CCNE and SNIA certified storage engineer on site, that needs to be first and foremost. The requirements are actually amplified when you go out to the edge, whether it's the manufacturing edge, manufacturing floors at Harrison Steel, where they're pouring the ingots and running out the sheets, so to speak, or the bottling lines at Coca-Cola, or your average SMB. The needs are the same. And what do all those places not have in common? VCPs and CCNEs and SNIA certified storage engineers.
Yep.
They have real people trying to get through their jobs and do the best job they can. That's actually part of why I chose Acronis as our primary data protection partner here at Scale, is specifically because you guys bring that same mentality to the table that we do. It's about enabling people to have a technology stack that moves their business forward without having to go get their master's thesis on how to handle data protection. At the end of the day, that's what's happening in the world, is it's going out to the edge, out from the data center, and the difference is night and day.
Yep. And the user, even in large enterprise, that end user is typically the weakest link in the security chain or security stack, right?
The seat to keyboard interface problem has never gone away. At the end of the day, it really hasn't. But that's also magnified by when you start talking about things like oil derricks out in the Gulf, where component failure is an order of magnitude worse than it is when a power supply dies in a PC, that's sitting next to a desk. Let's face it, that power supply goes up in smoke out on the oil derrick. Okay? And whatever collateral damage happened to that machine internally, it's not a $50 power supply anymore. It's $50 for a power supply and 50 grand for half-hour flight time for each half hour of flight time to just get components out to that location. And then on top of that, what don't you have there to fix it? The VCPs and CCNEs and so on and so forth. You have a guy who's really needing to get this thing back online yesterday. And by conjoining the level of data protection that you've brought to the table with the kind of infrastructure that Scale brings to the table, we're enabling those people to do things like single button click and be back online.
I think you really illustrated something there, which is, it's not just cyber that is a threat to availability, right? There's a lot of attention and investment around preventing intrusions or malware or other types of cyber events. But sometimes the old problems are still the most important ones, like something as simple as hardware failure.
No, the entire cyber realm is additive to the already existing challenges that we faced in the IT world. Okay, yeah, it's not 1996 anymore. Your biggest concern may or may not be the worker trenching through the lines that run to your building. Okay, but that doesn't mean, with the advent of all of the very, very high profile cyber events of just the past year, that all of those other things have gone away. They haven't. So that's what positions Acronis uniquely here, especially as it relates to the SMB, the mid-market, and the distributed edge, distributed enterprise, is you're bringing a technology stack, natively integrating with our own stack here at Scale, that enables protection at every single one of those levels, from the historic guy with a backhoe trenching through the lines, all the way up through, you know, choose which high-profile cyber attack you want to insert here. The neat thing about this joint approach, whether it's at the edge, the fog, the core, or the cloud, is we're enabling real people to get jobs done, full stop, at a price point no one else can touch, at an approachability level that others just hope to aspire to.
Yep, absolutely. And it really illustrates the benefit of the integration and the partnership. Acronis on the software side, delivering the full end-to-end cyber recovery capabilities, preventative measures. You know, I was in a meeting today and a customer was telling me about their a close call that they had with ransomware. And of course, it started with the user clicking on a link. Now, the threat actors were pretty sneaky. They spoofed a customer of that entity with high pressure. Hey, we need a quote. Click here. These are our specs, and you can get pricing so we can order. And so I thought that was really interesting. That was a new capability, or a new avenue that I've heard for phishing. And the threat actors got in, but didn't actually activate because they went to try and search for the backup archives first, and they were detected via MDR. But obviously, you're going to want to have those preventative measures, and then our integration with Scale for storage and retention of the archives and immutability to make sure you can recover in the event that they get in is absolutely critical. Now,
absolutely.
To Phil's point on cyber recovery, are you seeing any changes in the market, any integration in security and data protection management in your customer base? Or is that something that's still, in your view, in progress?
You know, you can thank MGM for this, and I'm sure they'll take it as a backhanded compliment, but it's not intended as one. That one event being so supremely high profile, and not just amongst us in the tech world, but everybody saw that happen in real time. People locked into their hotel rooms and locked out. And I mean, just, it was a mess, right? That has raised the level of awareness that, hey, we need to be paying attention at least 2 orders of magnitude since last fall when it happened. Okay. Now, I'm going to take my hat off to Acronis here for active protection. I've seen it make a difference with my own customers. You see, nobody else out there brings that complete suite, and there's a reason that we OEM Acronis Cyber Protect from your team, is because it makes a difference for our customers. For example, I happen to know of one that, much like the example you just laid out a moment ago, clicked on a bad link. An admin did. Okay? But active protection caught it, stopped it cold, and rolled that infestation back and out before he had time to even get a cup of water. Full stop. It's that level of layered protection, much like Phil was talking about earlier. It's that level of multiple vendor layered protection that Scale and Acronis are bringing to the table that's keeping my own customers safe in this world that is anything but right now.
Absolutely. That's a great story, Alan. And for the audience, if you're not familiar, active protection is a capability of Cyber Protect that is really specifically tuned to detect, stop, and even revert changes due to ransomware. Acronis offers a full stack anti-malware engine as well as EDR, so those could be considered more like antivirus and EDR, MDR. But active protection is its own capability that can actually be used standalone, even if there is a different antivirus or EDR. It complements those capabilities. And in addition, I think a question was asked, Active Protection provides protection of Acronis files. So it prevents modification of our agent or our backup files to prevent tampering with our ability to protect the device. So,
You know, for anybody watching that really wants a better understanding, at least from a 90,000 foot view of what Active Protection does, you know, go to that great Google machine in the sky, so to speak, and I want you to use two search terms, Acronis and WannaCry. Hit the videos, and the very first video you're going to see is probably one of the best walkthroughs I've ever seen on exactly how Active Protection keeps environments safe from those kinds of threats. It's really kind of unparalleled in the industry.
that's a very good point, and it was very impressive to see that catching a lot of these when they were 0 days at the time. So very, very good point. Are you seeing, or are you, it's really new, so I'm not quite sure. I haven't seen a ton of change from the customer side, but NIST recently updated their framework, NIST 2.0, to add the governance function around the prior functions. Are you seeing any impact to that in terms of how customers are managing or scoping these edge deployments?
So I'm seeing more and more questions inbound, and people are starting to treat it as more than they did historically, even with version 1.0, more than just a checkbox. You know, historically in this industry, people went, oh, do you have this? Do you have that? With no real intention of ever using it. They just wanted the security of the checkbox. Yeah, we got that. Yeah, we got that. And I'm starting to see people actually take these things very, very seriously. Interestingly enough, coinciding with some of the quotes they're getting on renewal for their cyber insurance. You know, this is stuff you got to pay attention to one way or another.
Yeah.
So starting to see the uptake, starting to see people going, wait a minute, I do need to pay attention. I'd give it a few more months for that to really accelerate in the SMB and mid-market spaces.
Yep, I would agree. And we only have 30 seconds or so left here, Alan. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure that we get to?
You know, I will say this much. The similarities between our two companies and how we see the IT world are stark once you start taking a close look. What we both do, and do incredibly well, is take very difficult to manage, difficult to master concepts and make them easy. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to spend their days thinking about the stuff that isn't directly germane to keeping operations moving forward. We've done the hard work on the front end so that they can reap the benefits. And that's something that I think folks need to pay a little closer attention to.
Absolutely, Alan. We love our partnership with Scale. Great company, great people, great technology. So thank you very much for your time. And we're going to need you for a few minutes more. I think back to Fernanda, and we're going to jump into Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan and Ryan. And, you know, Alan was talking about hotels that have been hit. Ryan, I hope you're safe. Make sure you sell them some Acronis Cyber Protect. I know you're traveling right now. So
live from London. Thanks, Fernanda.
So let's make sure we got everybody back on the stage. Let me take a look at the questions that we have here for our speakers. Okay, so how many of these frameworks are suspected to be implemented without a business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan program conducted first to determine requirements, accountabilities, budgets, and accepted risk? Who would like to take that?
Well, I think Phil probably has some insight into this because he spends a lot of his time talking to customers our solutions engineer and enterprise experts can probably weigh in. But as Joe and I alluded to early on, there's clearly a heightened requirement coming from both insurers and regulatory authorities in ways that they didn't a few years ago, for you to focus on disaster recovery, to focus on business continuity, in either both to qualify for insurance and to make sure that you're meeting regulatory requirements. So if folks are thinking that they're adopting a framework and only paying attention to the left side, they're not going to hit their goals for cyber insurance qualification or for regulatory compliance. I'll leave it to the rest of the panel to talk about what they're seeing in terms of actual real world implementations here.
Yeah, I would say in terms of, specifically what you just talked about, right? So incident response, backup recovery, et cetera. We're seeing higher end businesses, so probably, Acronis clients, that's just becoming mandatory effectively, right? Like you'd be kind of silly not to already have it. And I think it's one, obviously there's going to be numbers there that the insurance companies put together to say like, hey, obviously, if you're all singing off the same sheet of music, you have a plan after something goes wrong, then you're going to be less likely to shell out huge gobs of money. But speaking with the underwriters, even for smaller companies, some of the feedback I've gotten details, they're kind of viewing that as like a canary in the coal mine of having those plans already in place to show, yes, they actually are thinking about, if this were to happen, how do we minimize the impact of that? And so I think it's, obviously good all around. Now, in terms of implementing frameworks, I'm just the guy that gets to say you should probably do it for regulatory reasons. I am no longer the guy that actually has to go through that exercise. But what I will say is, whenever we're conversing with non-technical people, so that could be, leadership, management, board of directors, et cetera, I like to have just a picture that I can show people, right? And I think that being able to, whether it's ISO or NIST or CIS or something to that effect, right, to be able to say, hey, we're good, we're bad, we're implementing, right? I think that's useful, right, to just have a picture, because once you show people, hey, this is how big, let's say NIST CSF, right? This is how big it is. There might be a lot of red boxes on that presentation. Even for non-technical folks, red is bad. They get some nervous. And then hopefully that'll help the IT folks get that additional funding, support, and tone from the top.
I'll throw a couple pieces of IDC data out here. We've done surveys of organizations worldwide, and we found that when you ask people if how do they feel comfortable that they're fully prepared for a cyber attack, we got typically about 85% yes responses to those. But then you ask people, what were the results when you did get attacked? And we find that fewer than a third are able to actually recover without paying a ransom, fully recover. About 50% lose data. The majority of recoveries take days to weeks. So I think there's a real disconnect between where people are and where they think they are. And I think a lot of that is that they have not fully implemented the frameworks or used them as a guideline to be able to do that development.
Awesome.
Yeah, you know what? I talked to a lot of our partners, and I'm having a plan is one thing. Testing the plan is also important, because it's the same reason that we do fire drills in large buildings. You don't want the first time that you identify a gap in your strategy to be when you've actually got something you have to deal with right away. So being able to, certainly frameworks are an important part of that. But we're seeing, especially if you look at the evolution of the cybersecurity framework, when you talk about a lot of things have been added to that 2.0 version. That includes things like validating and testing and going through processes. And it is important to have the controls in place, but it's also important to remember that systems don't exist in isolation. They're part of a broader picture. and really understanding and being prepared for when a real incident happens. It's not a panic. It's a, we know what to do. We have a process. Let's follow it.
You know, in the SMB space, where the state and local, etc., one of my first warning signs when I'm, out on the road visiting customers, etc., is when I ask them, where's your DR plan? Where's your BC plan? And the first thing they do is pull out a red folder that's been sitting on top of an overhead for a decade, and they blow 3/4 of an inch of dust off of it. The days of doing that, writing a plan once, never testing it, never thinking about it, and trying to sunny day your way through life, yeah, those ended about a decade ago. And quite frankly, one of the best things to happen to the IT industry writ large, whether it's the smallest of the small SMBs, the distributed enterprise, the edge implementations, etc., is actually the cyber insurance group. And the reason for that is not, yeah, write us a check. No, it's because they are acting as the de facto enforcement mechanism that's forcing people to do what they didn't really want to have to think about. Nobody wants to write a will either, but you need to. And it's the same thing. Step in, step up, and thanks, JD, for your good work on this.
Awesome. Anybody else? Ryan, Pat? Or we can move on to the next question I got here.
I like Steven's analogy. The first time you want to deal with a fire, you should practice how you deal with it beforehand, right? So I thought that was a great analogy.
Well, and to Alan's point too, even here at Acronis, when we work with our partners, we have business plans, that we're working with them, and it's on a quarterly basis, right? We're reviewing this and identifying where we can pivot and do improvements for their customers.
I guess
Yeah, I
the
would
easiest way I would put this is the time to test the seatbelt is not when you're plowing into the Peterbilt. Full stop.
Yeah, like I guess fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon the way I look at it, I have been on the back end, obviously, of hundreds of cyber events. Right. So yeah, even something as simple as disaster recovery, right? Business continuity, shockingly bad at most companies. So generally what I do is I get to go in as the insurance guy, so everybody kind of hates me anyways. So I go, all right, what's your plan if something goes wrong? And it's typically crickets. And then it's who's talking to the attorney? Who's talking to PR, right? Who's vetting contracts? Who's going to sit down with the negotiator? And you kind of get the wheel spinning. And usually what precedes that conversation is, we will never pay the ransom. And I'm like, no, I saw your questionnaire. You're definitely paying the ransom, right? Let's talk about that. And believe it or not, I'm actually usually pretty successful in getting more money for the IT folks, which is quite nice. So hopefully everybody does it.
Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So make sure you have a backup so that if you do encounter the situation, you've got something secure you can hold on to. So,
yep.
Awesome. I got another question here for us. How do we minimize data loss when we let users restore our own systems, their own systems?
Right. So I think the question here is around one-click recovery. And there's a concern here that a classic example here, a hospital gets hit with a widespread ransomware attack, and they've got a large remote workforce, right? Since COVID, a lot of hospitals aren't requiring the people that work in accounts payable or human resources to come into the hospital. If you're not involved directly in patient care, stay home, work from your home office. Problem is that in the event of a widespread outage, ransomware that takes down a bunch of these remote workers, IT can become a bottleneck in your recovery efforts, since they either have to have the user come into a physical facility to recover their machine, or they got to reach out remotely and do it. And doing that serially can really make the downtime of that remote workforce pile up. So you tell people, all right, pull out your little instruction card with the 3 steps, reboot, function key, click, to rebuild your machine from a local backup. And that becomes just a kind of an exercise in identifying your proper recovery point objective. In a lot of cases, what you will conclude is it's better to sacrifice a few hours worth of data that the remote worker created between their last backup and the ransomware attack to get them online again in a matter of minutes, as opposed to waiting hours for them to be recovered. And that's a kind of a simple exercise in identifying your appropriate recovery point objective, how much data you can afford to lose as you get back online. In the industrial IT case, very often this is not a tough decision at all, because the computers controlling OT or ICS aren't accumulating a lot of fresh data. In some cases, they're usually single-purpose machines. All they're doing is configuring the painting robots on the automobile assembly line. And given the really high cost of downtime there, it's a very easy decision. Have the local worker, the OT engineer, ICS engineer, have them rebuild that machine with 1-click backup to get the industrial process moving quickly again, and minimize that downtime to a matter of minutes. So it's a little bit tougher decision where the user is generating data, but in many cases, what we found is that the ability to get people back online in a hurry outweighs a few hours or days worth of data.
Yeah, and James, just to build on that or to elaborate, Acronis provides a lot of capabilities to make sure that there's absolutely no data loss. So when you're talking about a point in time, typically that's an incremental backup, which you're scheduling at some sort of interval. But we have that, and in addition, we have continuous data protection. So if ultimately it's decided, like maintaining or preserving the most recent up-to-date amount of data is most important to us, then that's fine. You can still have the recovery be centrally orchestrated through the IT team. But if availability is the difference between having a slight business disruption and a PR producing outage, a lot of the customers will choose 1-click recovery to eliminate the bottleneck.
Well, gentlemen, I would like to thank you, because that's all the time we got today. So we got an amazing lineup of speakers here. So thank you, Alan, Ryan, Stephen, Pat, Phil, Joe, and James. And for everybody that's still here with us, before you go, please answer the final poll question that we'll have. Again, if you want to take advantage of the 30 days free trial, please check it out. And now we can go to the poll question. And make sure to answer the question, because our team here will be following up with you. We got Stephen Nichols' team that is full of amazing solutions engineers that can answer all of your questions. And let's move on. So finally, if you have the means and the desire, please support the Acronis Cyber Foundation. So that is our nonprofit that builds schools and provide tech training to children in need around the world, as we saw the videos earlier today. So thanks all of you for joining us today. I hope to see you soon at another Acronis event.